So this session, this afternoon, we're going to talk about graphing and data analysis. And so we're going to talk about this through the lens of our progress monitoring and what we have to do in terms of data collection and monitoring progress. So what we know statewide is that we do have issues with progress monitoring. Lots of times when the Department of Education or the Office of Special Ed and Early Learning conducts monitoring visits, one of the things they find that's consistently incorrect is the progress monitoring piece. And so we're getting better at it, and we're getting better every year. But one of the things that we have is when we graph our data, we're doing a better job with graphing data. But then we have to add that extra layer of analysis. We have to really look at that data and really understand what that data is telling us about how a student's doing. And then we reflect on that data and we analyze it. So that's kind of one more step that we sometimes don't always get to. But so that's kind of what we're going to focus on for this afternoon session. So anybody have any thoughts or ideas or anything before we start? But we're going to use this model, kind of the I do it, we do it, you do it model around how we're going to do this graphing process. So for this session, we're going to look at goal monitoring. We're going to look at our data collection, and we're going to look at how we use data to graph and analyze how our students are performing. So that's really important because we have to be able to see that visual representation. We can take that information to us with an ARC meeting. We have those progress reports. If we do a good job with understanding that, that's going to help us have conversations with parents about how students are performing. And we don't have to guess how students are performing. We know because we have the data there in front of us that tells us how that students is doing, what they're responding to in terms of interventions and how well they're doing. So that's important. But we're going to go through today just that process of what that looks like, and we're going to do some examples. So I'm going to let you all do an analysis at the end. So you'll need a piece of paper, a Post-it note, or something like that. So for today, we're going to look at a behavior. So we're going to take a goal, and we're going to take and look at that analysis part. We're going to do one for math, and we're going to do one for reading. We have to look at, things about goal monitoring. We have to understand what baseline is, for one thing. And we have to look at how that describes how the student their performance of a skill or strategy in measurable terms. Everything we do in terms of a skill or strategy that we use with kids needs to be measurable, right? We have to have words or ways to measure. So if you think about how we compute or how we figure out, it's kind of easy if we do fluency. We can figure out words correct per minute, those kinds of things. But when we get into a little more difficult things, like if we're trying to calculate performance on a writing prompt, that gets a little bit harder, right? We have to figure out a way to quantify that. We have to take the words written correctly. We have to calculate word sequence. We have to calculate grammar and punctuation. So there's a lot of different things that are involved in that when we start thinking about how we write a goal for kids and then how we're going to monitor that. So that's a real important thing. So here's a few examples. We can count words per minute. That gives us a rate. It's okay to get a percentage, right? Because some of our goals are written, 3 out of 5 trials. We're going to calculate a percentage. I can tell you what the percentage a child might obtain on comprehension passages. I may give them 5 different comprehension passages or 5 different trials, and I'm going to calculate each time they complete one of those passages. I'm going to calculate what their percent is, right? And then I can add those all together, and I can use 3 of those to establish a baseline. But I have to be able to do that, and I have to think about how to quantify that. What about a rubric? See, you can use a rubric also to do data collection, like in writing. If you have you're working on a writing prompt, you can have a rubric. You could use that rubric. What do they get? A 1, 2, 3, or 4. As long as you're using that same tool to measure each time, you can calculate that. And so one of those things when we think about our goal writing is how are we going to calculate the student performance? So, we've learned, and like I said, we've come a long way with that part too, identifying how we're going to measure that goal and how we're going to report that student progress. And so here's some ideas about how we establish baseline. We have to figure out some very specific things. We have to know what method of measurement we're going to choose. And whatever we choose has to match with that goal and make sense. Because sometimes we get a little disconnected on that. And if we're not using the right tool to measure that goal, then when we get to our data analysis and the written part of it, it's not going to match what we've been working on. So that's all part of that whole big system, right? But if we do a good job, we bridge that gap between compliance and the paperwork and the academic piece. Because if we know our kids well enough and where they're performing at, that drives our present level performance. Either if it's an initial placement, we know where kids are at, but if it's an annual review and we're looking at baseline data, we got that progress data. There's no question we know how that kid's performing based on their goals. So then we can decide what's going to be appropriate for that next annual goal for them. How are we going to move that kid? What's in a year out? What opportunities do we have to move that kid in a year out? So then we know in the present levels what their strengths are. We know what their areas of concern are. We have that baseline data. We've either collected that from doing our own baseline, or we've collected that from baselines from our progress monitoring from the year before. And then we know what adverse effect that has, because we know what the areas they're struggling and what that impacts their academic performance. So it all really connects, right? So if we do a good job with monitoring where they're at and collecting the data and analyzing it, that drives our present levels, that drives our goal writing. We know what goal they need so that we don't have kids having the same goal for 3 years in a row. We don't want a 6th grade kid having a goal that he got in 3rd grade on the 3rd grade reading level and have that goal in 4th grade and have that goal in 5th grade and have that goal in 6th grade. Because sometimes that can happen if we don't have a good handle on what their progress is, if we don't have a good handle on the intervention for that. We're going to practice with a behavior goal. So we're going to kind of go through this one together. So this is Mr. Smith wrote a while back, so he can jump right in here any time he wants to and help us out with that. But he came up with a goal here for Karen. So we have a behavior goal. So Karen's got a little trouble staying on task, right? So Karen is either having some trouble, getting started in class or staying on task. And those are some things that we know happen every day with our kids. So if we're going to give a Karen a task, but if we give a Karen a task or her directions, we give her a task or direction, we want her to begin the task within 1 minute on 8 out of 10 trials, as measured by a latency recording form 3 times a week. We're going to see. We've already decided how we're going to record it, right? We've got a plan. We're going to use a latency recording. We got a plan. We're going to watch Karen. We're going to give her a prompt or a task or some directions, and we're going to wait and see how long it takes Karen to get started on her task or her work, right? And I bet we all have kids like that we need to do some monitoring on that. All right. So what we know is we've used a latency recording form. We've used that in the past. We've got one. That's what we use for our data collection. Well, we know that her average time beginning a task after the teacher gives instruction was 4 minutes. So it takes her 4 minutes right now to get on task to be able to complete that task. That's what we know, right? So she's either looking out the window, she's sharpening her pencil, she's hunting her paper, she can't find her stuff. There's something going on or she's avoiding the task, right? One of those things is happening. So we're going to have to figure out what's going on with her. We want it to decrease the amount of time. We want her to get the task or the directions and get busy working, right? So that's our intention for that particular behavior. All right. So we got to have a latency recording form. We got to have some kind of record form that we collect this data on, right? We can't just guess. We've got to have some way that we're collecting data. So let's say this is our progress monitoring tool, right? We've got it on a clipboard or however you want to use this, but you got this document in front of you and you're going to give her a trial, right? You got it filled out all up here. You got all of these things with the observation. And we want to know how long it takes for her to begin performing a task or a behavior. So we write down the time that the teacher starts, 9:03. We're going to wait to see when the behavior begins. We're going to see how many minutes it is, right? We're going to count and we're going to write that time down. Now we're going to calculate over here. Was it 5 minutes? Was it 7 minutes? Was it 1 minute? And what we said is that we're going to look at that over time to see over 8 trials to see how well she's doing. But we also saying we're going to give her a, we're going to use some strategies like a verbal cue. Get started, let's begin. Or we might use a visual cue, right? We might give her a visual cue, and we're teaching her to watch for that visual cue, and that's the cue to get started on task. So we're teaching her. We're not just measuring her performance, but we're teaching her that skill in the meantime. So all along, when we're having when we're meeting with her, we're working on our goal, we're understanding how to be focused on task or how to get organized, or we're practicing a skill. And here might be, like I said, we might be using a verbal cue or a demand. It's time to get started, right? We use that. So if we're waiting and we're using this latency recording, we're going to add all that data together over here in this column. Like one time she took 60 seconds. One, she took 1.5 minutes. One was a little less than a minute. One was 35. And then for 4 assignments this week. So we're going to take all that together. We got a 60, a 90, a 50, a 35. And we're going to calculate that just like we would do an average, right? We're going to just add those together and divide by the number of data points that we have. So we know it was 58.75 seconds was the average latency for starting on the assignments. So would we have met that? Right, if we're looking at that over time, but remember we said we were going to do that on 8 out of 10 trials. So did we have 8 trials yet? But we're seeing some progress, right? We're seeing that she's making some progress. We got a plan of how we're going to measure it, and we know how to compute it now. We know how to make it a quantifiable or a percent or a number. So it's important. This is under 60 seconds. If that's our measure, is seconds, right? Or minutes. So we got that form. So now let's see what it looks like. So, all right, we got it right here. So this is what it might look like. So we're looking at this one every day. We're collecting this, right? So we're looking at the total amount of time, and every day we watch to see during class, here's the second, here's the third, here's the fourth. Every day we're going to collect time on those trials. Remember we said 10 trials? So on 8 out of 10 trials, we're looking to see if she got under a minute. All right, next day, same kind of thing. Because the frequency of this it depends on what you're measuring, right? If you're not measuring, you're measuring behavior, and you want that to be measured every single day. So you're going to have your 5 days on your clipboard, and you're going to have those on there so you can real quickly record that time. Here's the next thing. We're going to go the 8th, the 10th, the 11th. Here's our dates that we're recording, right? So we're still collecting. We're still collecting. We're still collecting data. Here's some more data points. Here's some more days that we're looking at. So every day we collect data because that's what we said we're going to do. All right, so here's where we're going to get to that analysis of data. We're looking at, so this one is based on minutes, right? So this one is based on minutes. It doesn't have to just be minutes, but for this particular one we're working on, it's minutes, right? Because right here's where she's at. It takes her about 4 minutes. That's where we started at. We want her to be at 1 minute. So you see, that's our line, that's our goal, that's our aim line right there. Now, part of that is we're going to look at the trend. What's the trend? When we start looking at that data point, we see all kinds of things happening here, don't we? Right? But overall, generally, what observations can we make about those data points? That we see a reduction, absolutely. So what else do you see that's occurred during this data collection that is something that you would note? We had some kind of change, right? We've had an instructional change. We weren't really seeing the results that we thought we ought to see, right? Because we got right here 3.1. Oh yeah, it's going down. 2.2, it's going down. Let's back up to 3 minutes. And then we're back up to 3.9. So we're all over the place, right? Is that really working? No. And then we kind of get back down here. So, but look, we go here, we go down here, we back up again, down, and then back up. So we know at that point, we didn't have to wait. Look here, this was just what? 10 days. 10 days. We didn't have to wait an extended number of days before we made an instructional change, right? So what we were using, we decided, okay, she's going to have to self-monitor. We're going to teach Karen how to self-monitor. So she's going to be monitoring her regulating her behavior when she gets on task. What is it that she needs to support that and keep her on task? Because she's going to be responsible for that. So we've shifted that to her responsibility and given her some self-monitoring. Okay, so what happens then after she starts self-monitoring? Yeah, it starts going down, right? We're seeing 1.7, We're seeing 1.7, we're seeing 1.3. So pretty soon, if she continues on that trend, what's going to happen? She's going to meet that goal, right? Because we've given her the skills and we built the skills because we give her strategies to help self-regulate or self-monitor what she was doing, right? So we've helped her to be able to achieve that goal. So let's go over here and look at this written analysis. We're saying that we collected baseline data and we know it was at 4 minutes, right? That's where we started at. We collected that baseline data. We used that latency recording. We either got that baseline data from the progress monitoring before, or we've established baseline through collecting some data like those latency recordings. That's how we would collect data. One of those two ways is how we're going to get that information. Now, we collected on consecutive days as well as non-consecutive days. Again, that's some comments that we're making about that, right? Because we're making some observations about this whole graph right here. Because it's not enough to just put the data on here, even though people can read that. We have to really think through that. And that's where we get this piece right here. Yeah, it's important to look at, you might want to look to see, okay, she was doing okay, pretty good here. What happened right here? What's happening here? There may be things that we can attribute to that help us better understand how Karen's performing. Right? So let's go back and look. So we've got that data real clear. There's no question, right? We're not guessing a bit. We know how many minutes it took her to get on task for every single one of those days. Now, we also know that instructional change happened. So we know that data says that her average time before beginning a task decreased when you put in that behavioral strategy of self-monitoring, right? So what are we speaking about for that student's performance? What are we saying about this self-monitoring? That it's working. That's right. Why is that important that we note that or we reflect on that? Now think about taking this data to an ARC meeting to have a meeting with parent. Think about presenting that data and you say, okay, we know that when Karen uses a self-monitoring strategy, that she's successful in the classroom about getting on task. So it's a whole lot easier to have a conversation with a parent or a guardian about student performance. So next year, you're probably not going to have to write that same goal about Karen, right? Because Karen's ready to work on something else, or Karen's ready to do something, more. Because right now Karen's able to focus on the task because we've given her some skills, and that may be what Karen needed to be successful. So it's always important that we have those conversations about before beginning a task. Before that she didn't have a strategy, now she does. Now our data says we're going to trend line progressing toward making that goal. So it's a whole lot easier, like I said, to explain that in the ARC meeting when you can go back and support that. We don't keep doing the same thing over and over because we're ready to move on to something else. I bet you there's something else that Karen could work on, right? There's another skill, or there's something else that she might need some help with, that because we've extinguished that behavior and we're ready to move on. So I'm gonna let you all just stop for a second. So you'll need your Post-it note. Those of you that are virtual, you'll need your Post-it note or something to write. But I'm just gonna give you about, 2 minutes to think about 3 top behaviors that you address on the kids with your current caseload. Think about 3 priority behaviors that you have. Is it task? Is it disrupting class? Is it interrupting others? But what are the things that you deal with the most? Okay, y'all can stop right there for just a second. Okay. All right, so think about those 3 behaviors. Was it hard to come up with those? No, you all do that all the time, right? Those are pretty easy. So do you know think about it now. What are you using to collect that data? How are you collecting that data? Let's go ahead. Now we're going to try to do one. We're going to use a reading goal. So I believe we've got Karen again. So I believe Karen's in 8th grade. But Karen, when we're presenting her with a 5th grade passage, Karen is going to fluently read 195 correct words per minute across 3 consecutive probe sessions. We're going to measure it by a weekly oral reading fluency probe. Okay. So we're saying right now we know that Karen can read 105 words correct per minute, or correct words per minute. That's what we know, our baseline. How do you think we got our baseline? Yep, we did an oral reading fluency and we averaged it out. Did you say something else? Previous data, right? It might be from a goal she'd worked on previously, and we've got that data moving into that baseline. So guess what? That tells us where she's at. Where can we use that information? Where might be this, where else besides just in this piece on the goal writing, where we're going to need to know this stuff? In the analysis of our goal. And then what's that going to go back to our present level, right? Because that's what we're talking about, our baseline data. We have to know what her baseline is, right? So that helps us know that if we got the right goal for her and how we're doing around that present level of performance, right? That gives us where she's at in her fluency. All right, so we know that she's at 105. We want her to be at 195. I wonder where I got that number from. Right. So we're aiming toward, we don't want her to just get to 110, right? Or we're going to have a reasonably calculated goal for her that we want her to make progress, right? All right. So guess what we're going to use? We're going to use an A or Fluency Probe, right? Because this one's pretty easy to calculate when you do fluency. But we're going to give her a probe each week. So this one's on Monday or Friday, and this one's the next Friday, and this is the next Friday. And we're going to calculate her total number of words read minus the number of errors. And that gives us her correct word per minute, which is 121. All right, so that's our first data point. We're going to look at 119. That's our second data point. We have 120. We're doing the same thing. So we're doing this on Friday, for example. Sometimes people progress monitor on Friday. Here's one at 129. So this is the next week. We're also can look at something else here. We can look at errors. We're going to look at error analysis, right? We can also see how many errors she's making. Is she getting better, not making as many errors? Is she reading fluency and making less errors? Well, we know. We know about how many words she can read and how many errors she's making. Is she getting any better at it, right? Because you may be reading more words fluently, but are you making more mistakes? Because that's something we would need to know too when we think about her progress. Same thing, I think this one's 138 correct words per minute. So you see over time, we've collected that progress monitoring data, right? Those data points are real clear because we've calculated those. So let's see what that might look like now. So here is our passage. We're saying that her goal is getting at 195. She's at 105. So here's our goal, right? And right here is our correct words per minute. So let's start out that her baseline is 105. So there's our data point, right? That's her data point, 105. Okay. Where do we want her to go? Here, right? At 195. So let's put our goal up there. That's where we want her to move to. Now, that's our line, right? That's our aim line. That's going to tell us that's where we're trying to get to. We want her to get to 195. All right. Remember back when we looked at that first data point in August, she read 121 words a minute. So we put her data point right there. Next week we looked, she did 119. Okay, that's a little less. So we already noticing that, you know, we have to, something we need to be checking into or monitoring. All right, next week she had 120. Okay, let's see where we're at on that. Okay, so that's still maybe a one word correct. All right, something we're looking, that's 3 data points. Is it time to make a change? What we're doing is probably not working, right? Because we're not seeing much of a rate of growth, or we're not seeing much performance increase. So it's time to look at it. How long are we going to let that go before we say it's time to do something different, right? So it's time to make a change. To look at that, that's 3 weeks, because you're doing progress monitoring, but during also the rest of the days when you're not monitoring progress, you're teaching her the skills to be a more fluent reader. So you're teaching those evidence-based, research-based strategies for fluency. Okay, so we're going to make an instructional change. We need to do something different. Okay, so we did a new, we started using words and phrases. So we're teaching her to read words and phrases to increase her fluency, because we're saying that she gets more fluent at those phrases, then she's going to read more quickly. So maybe that's what we're using here. Okay, so that next Friday we'd check, well, she made it to 129. Well, that's the highest she's been so far. So that's a promising practice for us, for her. Now, next Friday, we check again. She's 133. Did we see some gains? Yeah. So we can say definitely that we've made some gains, right? We've got the data to support our decision. 138. Okay. So we're making some progress. We're moving up. All right. So what are we looking now? When we're looking at that trend, what are we seeing now on the trend? That's right. We're seeing an upward trend. We see an increase. All right. So that's where we're looking at that trend line. We take those data points then and we can determine what is she on that trajectory to make progress. When we look at that, and if she's not on that trajectory to make progress, we really have to think about what we're using and what we're doing with her, thinking about when she's in the resource room, or we're pulling her for small group. If she's in co-teaching, what strategies or supports are we giving her? What are we doing when we pull her in the resource room? If we keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results, that's what Einstein defines as insanity, right? So that's the same kind of thing for us. This way we know and we can support that. Like nobody can argue that when you gave her those probes and this is where she's at, we're never guessing. We know exactly where she's at, and you can't argue that we've not done the same thing for 3 or 4 years and her having that same goal and not making any progress. All right, so here's our analysis. It says that her reading is at 105 words correct per minute. We talk about her first data point, demonstrated that she increased in fluency. She made it to 121. However, the following 2 trials resulted in minimal progress with scores of 119 and 120. That's important to talk about, right? Y'all agree with that? So an instructional change for decoding strategies was used. So they stopped what they were using. They give a brand new instructional strategy, and we're teaching her how to decode. So we're teaching her to find words inside of words that help her figure out words for fluency, right? So that's a decoding strategy, is a fluency strategy. That's an evidence-based strategy. So we're looking for words inside words, and we're chunking. So we're teaching her how to kind of be a little detective when she's trying to figure out words. So we're building her skill. We're teaching her how to figure out a word, to read that word, right? We're giving her some skills. All right. Now, so then we talk about Karen had a change with increase of 9 points. So they computed the number of points that she rated because we're saying correct words per minute, right? So we know that she increased just as soon as we gave her that new strategy, she increased by 9 words correct per minute. Okay. So she made it to 120. Then she went to 129 on August the 29th. So that's telling us within a couple weeks, she went up another, she went from 9 points the first time. She started here from 120, went up 9 points. So just like you all said, she continued to make progress through the next 2 weeks. So she went from 133 to 138 respectively. So we say that she is trending below the aim line because she's still below her aim line, but she is steadily improving toward her goal. At this time, no instructional change needed to be made, right? We're saying that strategy that we taught her is working for her. Now, I bet you if we go back and look at Karen, she's in the 8th grade or she's in the 9th grade and she's reading on a 5th grade passage, right? So Karen's got some room to improve. So just because she made that goal there, that doesn't mean that she don't still have plenty to work on, right? But that tells us we don't want to keep Karen working on fluency. We want to move her forward. What does it look like for 6th grade? What is it? How many words you have to get correct for 7th grade? How many words you got to get correct for 8th grade when you're measuring fluency, right? So we don't stifle her. We are able to keep moving her forward. All right. So think about 3 areas, and I'm just going to give you a minute to do that. Think about 3 areas on your own caseload, the kids that you work with right now, that you have goals around. What are some of those besides just fluency? I know we talked about it in a previous session. We probably have some comprehension goals. We probably have some phonics goals, but write down 3. So let's real quickly think about, let's go around again one more time. Just talk about something that you're working on with kids in the area of reading. So you're working on letters and sounds, right? Sight words. So comprehension and fluency for high school. It does vary based on what grade level you're working with. How about you guys back here?
That's the same thing. Yeah. Comprehension.
Comprehension.
Vocabulary.
Yeah, vocabulary is a huge one. Because we think about breaking that down in those 5 components of reading. You know, we do phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. So one of those areas or a couple of those areas we're going to be working with kids in. So do you already have a plan for how you collect data? Do y'all know how you collect data on that? And can you do that same kind of thing with graphing that data? That's a hard thing to do. So if you're checking comprehension, for example, let's use that one because that one's a little more complex. But you use a reading passage, or you using some kind of passage, and then you have them complete questions around it, or you do retell fluency. There's lots of different ways that we can measure what they do with comprehension, but we would be able to do that same data analysis, right? If you're like, we have the 7 comprehension strategies for reading. So you might choose a comprehension strategy and you're working with kids on that. And that might be like summarizing or retelling the story or making inferences. So those different strategies, you might choose one of those strategies and you're working with those kids to see if that strategy is working. Well, if it's not, and you see those data points are really not making every time you give them that probe, that reading passage, that probe, then you look to change that. After a little while, you need to change that instructional strategy, right? Because it's not working. And that's where we had that conversation this morning. You go back and you find what are evidence-based strategies for teaching reading comprehension. Sometimes it takes a little work on it, but after you learn 1 or 2, you've got that forever in your teacher toolbox. And then next year you might learn another one or another one. And then again, forever, you, by the end of your career, you got a big bucket of toolbox of, you may have a tool truck full of strategies, right? That helps you, you know what to do when kids come to you. So we build that, right? I can think about back in my career, I didn't know much about some of those things that I really had to work hard to learn. But again, helping us know how to change those strategies and know when to change them helps us do a better job teaching kids. All right, we got one more. Now, Karen is going to solve she's with 10 one-digit subtraction problems. She's going to do 1-digit subtraction problems. She's going to correctly solve subtraction problems with 80% accuracy for 4 consecutive trials on math probes as measured weekly. So we're going to check her every week on a math probe, and she's got to do what? Yeah, subtraction. Yeah. All right. So we started out and we gave Karen, we had to calculate her baseline. We either got it from her previous progress monitoring data or we calculated baseline. We gave her 3 trials of calculating problems with accuracy, with subtraction problems, and we averaged all those together and we get 30%. So we know that Karen's about 30% solving with 10 one-digit subtraction problems. So she's got a little trouble with calculating those. All right, so here's our probes, right? We're giving her 1-digit subtraction. So she got 30% on this one. We checked that on Friday. Next week, we did the same thing. We checked it, she got 40. Next week, she got 40. Okay, so that kind of gives us an idea. So remember those numbers as we go through here. Next week, she got 50. Next week, she got 60. The next week, she got 70. How many data points is that? Or 60 again? How many was that? 6 data points. So we got 6 data points. What's happening every time? She's getting better. Something we're doing is working, right? But let's talk about what we're going to say with this analysis right here. We're going to have to go back and we're going to have to kind of look at and see where she's at along the way. So we could go back and see at in April. Let's go back and look. I mean, on this one, she got 30, and then another one is 40, and then another one is 40. So that's the first 3. Okay. Now the next 3, we got a 50, a 60, and a 60. Okay, somebody got those wrote down for us? We're going to stick them up here. Somebody got them? You want to stick them up here? You want me to stick them up here? Yeah, if you don't care, just give me like a couple 30s. Anybody got a 30 and a? Right.
No, I think we all just clearly started and wrote it.
You know what that means? I didn't give her explicit directions. Now I forget by the time I get up there what order
They're in the, yeah.
Okay, good.
Sorry.
All right, so now we've taken that data, we're going to put it up here, and if I can't reach, somebody might have to help me. So the next week we got 30. The next week we got what, 30, 40, 40. Here's our 40. And Brenda gonna come over and help me.
You ain't gonna make it to 60.
I'm not. Brenda will. Brenda will. Come on. Can you help me, Brenda?
She's a cheerleader, so I know you're not going to throw my shoulder.
I need 260s, Brenda, please. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. We ran out of room, didn't we? That's okay. We can put the other 260s up there. All right. Thank you, Brenda. So what are we going to make? You're going to do your own written analysis this time, all on your own. All right, just jot it down. It doesn't have to be fancy and have all the words in it, but just get out a scrap piece of paper and tell me what you see right here with this one, because we're talking about little Karen. I don't know if, yeah, little Karen solving math problems. What are we going to tell Karen's mom and dad when Karen's mom and dad comes to the ARC meeting? What are we going to tell Karen's teachers about what Karen's supports that Karen needs? So we're gonna share out right now. Tell me about what are some of the written analysis that you're going to include. What are some key points in this analysis that you're going to make sure you get? Who wants to start? And we'll do a round robin again around the table. You want to start, Scott?
Karen's baseline was 30%.
Okay, so Karen's baseline was at 30%. Very important. And her goal was 80%. Okay, yeah. The strategy used, you're going to talk about what?
We don't know that. But yeah,
We don't know.
Yeah.
Right.
Using this strategy.
Yes.
this
I
happens.
listed that she didn't even need an instructional training because she kept progressing.
Okay, that's important. Absolutely. She was saying that we don't need an instructional change. We know that we know what her baseline is, we know what her goal is and where she's moving. We would talk about the instructional strategy that we were using. That's important, right? It's important to know what works for Karen because we want to continue to do what works for Karen. All right, who else is next? Were you all over there? Did you all start? What else? Let's think, what else? What else are we saying about her?
List her scores.
We would list the scores. We could say, this is where she performed out at each week. Absolutely. We'd list those scores out. What else might we need?
Again, you say that you took the battle week.
You could talk about, yeah, you're saying that you're,
She's going to make her go.
She's headed toward it. How long did we give her to make her goal?
yeah, it'll be a year.
Oh,
Yeah.
so at her annual.
This will be her annual goal, right? So at her annual review, that's what Brenda was talking. We write that goal for what's reasonably calculated for student progress in the course over for a year.
And yeah, I mean.
She's gonna be.
Yeah,
Sure, yeah.
yeah. So she's probably going to meet it.
Because you didn't show that it's the year to wrap before her annual. And show how
We
that-
gonna
Right.
have another meeting before
Cause she's
that.
doing this.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Carried over from the previous year, 'cause it's
That's
all
right.
for six, it showed that she had no regression over summer.
That's right. That's a good point. That's a very valid point. Wouldn't you imagine the power in those comments when you can sit down with a
Also say
teacher?
Whatever strategy, you're using, you're gonna withdraw that.
You could fade.
Yeah, she's using manipulatives, we're gonna take those away.
You could start letting her do more independent.
And, yeah.
Yeah. And if you think if she's doing pretty good with this, and we're talking about Karen, and we know she was at least above 5th grade, but she's doing one-digit subtraction. She's got a lot of work to work on, right? So we got plenty. Once we get her that foundation and that numeracy, we're ready to move her on. Yeah, right.
Tweak the goal without having to rewrite it. And
That's a good question. I'm gonna let, they were,
like she's obviously gonna make it within way before.
mhm.
How much can you tweak it or up it before you have to say, okay, we gotta.
We gotta meet
and
again,
change
get it
the
done.
goal.
That's a great question.
Written that goal. I wouldn't have,
No.
because it's not got enough
Right,
meat
it
to
would
it.
take her a long time.
Yes, it's a short goal. It's not, it might be an objective, but that's not the
Right,
goal.
yeah, right.
So you want to make the goal broad and make your objectives just as stepping stones to get to that goal.
Could we have done she can subtract 3-digit numbers and you're gonna start with a 1 from 1 and then a 2 from 2, and then
Those
Yeah.
would be your
those would be
objectives.
good
Yes.
benchmarks. But the
Absolutely.
whole goal should have been maybe 3-digit numbers.
Right. That's not a very,
Take her a year to get there.
right. And is that ambitious for this kid? We probably think she's 7th or 8th grade. It's not really an ambitious goal. That's right. That's just, that's a goal that's just kind of really, that's not putting much expectation on her, right? And so it's kind of below her level. Do you think we should have looked at how we figured out where her performance level was, or some screeners, or kind of, so you may get an IEP and you look at that goal and it may not be reasonable. It might be important that you go back and say, okay, well, this baseline data is telling me she don't need this 1-digit subtraction goal. She's going to need a little bit more ambitious goal. And that helps you know what goals to write for, because she's pretty good at it, right? She's making some progress. So next time you meet, if it's soon, you're going to go ahead and you're going to make a more ambitious goal. But like Brenda said, when we think about those goals, we want to set a goal that's reasonable, but it's ambitious for that kid. So that's not very ambitious or reasonable for a kid. I mean, it's probably reasonable. She's going to make it, but is she going to be challenged, or is that going to move her closer to grade level? And that's what questions you'd want to ask yourself when you think about that. So we don't want to always just take it that the person before us got it right 100% of the time. It's okay for us to look at that and have those conversations. What if you went to an ARC meeting with that data and you had that conversation with the ARC chairperson, the regular ed teacher, the parents, or the guardians, or whoever's with that kind of kid, and you had conversations with that kind of data? There's no question, right? You know about that kid. It's going to help you write that IEP for the next year. You're going to know what she's going to need to work on, because you're ready to answer those questions, because you know it definitely, because based on the student performance. We appreciate your time today. You guys that are here in person, thank you. Thank you all very much.